Welcome to the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.
And I'm Jill Nowacki, President and CEO of Humanidei. We're so glad you're joining us today for a powerful conversation that hits at the heart of leadership.
This episode is brought to you by the Sheeter Group, a leading executive benefits firm that meets your retention and succession needs. This includes non-qualified benefit plans, short and long-term incentive plans, compensation studies, scorecard design, performance evaluation, and more. Learn more at thesheetergroup.com. And now, let's talk about something that affects every leader, regardless of the role or title. Today's conversation is one that gets personal fast. It's the courage to be human. We're exploring how vulnerability, uncertainty, and imperfection aren't weaknesses to be avoided, but actually leadership essentials to be embraced.
Our guest today is someone who's lived that kind of leadership, John Bratsakis. As president and CEO of the Maryland and DC Credit Union Association, John has been a consistent advocate for collaboration, connection, and leading with authenticity.
We've known John for a long time, and what stands out most isn't just his experience and impact, but it's the heart he brings to the work he does. So let's dive right in with John. Welcome.
Well, thanks. It's great to see you guys.
Good to see you. John, we've all had our fair share of navigating the unknown and showing up both personally and professionally in times of uncertainty. But I think that uncertainty is really where a lot of real leadership can show up. That plan goes out the window and all you've got is your people, your presence, your ideas, your resilience. So when you've had those times and you've led through uncertainty, kind of what if those moments really taught you about yourself to help you move forward and launch from those places into kind of the next level of your leadership?
Sure. I think in those instances, right, those are, to your point, that right in sports, you always have your game plan. And after the first play, the game plan changes. No matter how good or no matter how much you plan, it's going to change. But I think one of the things that you learn through time and experience, because you can read about it, but until it actually happens, when you just have to just admit that I don't know what I don't know, or that we need to figure this out, or we need to figure it out together. And I think one of the things, and Jill, you were helpful in this back after George Floyd's murder, and I was at the office and it was COVID. So there really weren't a lot of people at the office. And if somebody was at the office, I knew it because the Keurig was kind of outside of my office. So I was sitting there and making coffee. And I remember it was Monday and Krista, who works for us, was there. And she normally has kind of a 1,000-watt smile that lights up the room. And I could tell something wasn't right. And I just said, "Are you okay?" And she just looked at me and just very matter-of-factly said, "No." And she said, "I just don't know why it has to be so hard to be Black in America." And that was one of those moments that you're talking about that you're not ready for it. You don't necessarily know what to do. And that was a beginning of trying really to search out and lead together and to talk with others. And first call was to Renee Sattywhite. And then I know you and I talked and just trying to find ways and then talking with our team about working ourselves through that. And how do we deal with that? And how do you get through that? And you couldn't do it because if you weren't authentic, or I guess if you tried to fake your way through it or use some textbook, it wasn't going to work.
It wasn't going to come across as genuine, I'm sure, right? That's the whole thing.
It needs to. Yeah. But I think so often, sometimes we just kind of refer to some book or some pamphlet or a TED Talk that somebody talked about where it's not that situation. You can learn from those things, but how you deal with that, unless you know the people you're talking to and you're working with, unless you've had that relationship, it's hard to navigate.
So when you're the CEO, maybe it's ego driven, but not even necessarily driven by ego. But there's this desire, right, to like take care of your people. Like you want to lead the team, you want to guide the team, you want to give the team answers and give them certainty when you can. And that was certainly a situation where, based on your actions afterwards, it seemed like you recognized you might not be the one that held all the answers to that. Was it just instant, or was there that initial temptation to be like, okay, well, I'm the CEO, so I should be able to fix this and take care of this, that you had to kind of move through in order to get to that place of collaboration on the answer?
I don't know if I would say it was instant, but I would say it was very quickly that I knew it wasn't going to be myself. In most examples that I've had of mentors and leaders that I've looked up to, it's never been about them. It's always been about a team and people that drawing on resources and the experts that know what they're doing and not trying to be something that you're not. So that's why my first call was to Renee is, I need some help. And then my next call was to Michelle on our team to talk about, I don't know what we need to do. I've talked to Renee, but whatever we do needs to be long term. It needs to be with intention. It needs to be with focus and not just do something so it looks like we're doing something kind of thing. And I think that was the hardest part. In most cases, we like to think we're connected to our credit unions. We kind of understand where they're from, but this was something that there were so many reactions to it and so much passion behind it that there needed to be a way to do it that was intentional and in a way that was done with empathy and compassion with the subject matter and all those involved.
Let me pivot a little bit here. I think about moments like that, but there have been many others. And sometimes I know even from my own experience, right? Like when you're young, you feel like you need to have all the answers. Even when you're new in a position, doesn't have to be young. We think we need to like have the answers. But there is that like almost a freedom that comes from when you don't expect yourself to have them all. And you build that network who you can ask. I would say that. And then another place that I want to make sure we hit on before we kind of move on from this is, at least I've found in my career and in the history of CUInsight, sometimes when that uncertainty is there or when there's that, kind of a pressure, that's when the most creativity comes out, that growth potential.
Absolutely.
As well, right? So let me throw that out there and I'll let you both see what popped into your heads.
I think that's absolutely it. And I always go, and many of you know, I go back to sports a lot, right? And it was always team issues. And you're going again, you have a team. So it was never about that you could play the whole game and play every position. You might be able to, but you can't do it all at the same time. And
come on, they called you prime time in high school, didn't?
No, but it was. That would have been fun. I wish. But I think to your point that there's a freedom in if you're comfortable collaborating with others, right? You're comfortable knowing that you don't have the answers, that you may have a piece, you may have an idea, but then as you bring everybody else in, things get honed, they get changed. It may be completely different than what I might have thought in the beginning, but you're going to get to a better place and you're going to get to a stronger place and you're going to get to something that's more impactful.
Yeah, I think like that idea of if you can say, I don't have to have all the answers and I don't have to be the one who is in control of exactly what we're doing here, you can get to that point where the answer is better, the creativity is greater, the impact may be better too. As you were talking about like moving through and like taking this point of uncertainty and saying, we're not going to rush. We're going to take the time to be intentional and get it right. I am not known for my patience personally. And so that idea of really like pausing on that and saying, okay, how do we take a little break here? And a couple of episodes ago, we had Lauren Culp on as our guest, and Lauren was talking about sort of the power of the pause when you're like being pushed to make a decision on something and you don't have the information, and being able to say like, and what she shared with us was, everybody knows that scammers, they put this sense of urgency out there that like force an action really quick. And if it's, well, I better hurry up and make a decision. And then it ends up not being the right decision. And so that idea of like truly being intentional during those times of uncertainty, being patient, letting things kind of process out with that makes a big difference. And as much as I think one of the challenges with this is like, we want to give our teams certainty. We feel like we owe them that as a leader. But when we can create that environment instead where we're able to say, it's safe to not have all the answers here. Like, it's okay to take the time to get things right instead of to do things fast too.
And that's something I guess I would kind of brings me into like the next question is about creating that safe space for, I would say, collaboration, but also being empathetic to everybody around us. That space is, I think, created over time, but it can be broken instantly with how you act. So I would ask John, with your team, and even the collaboration you've done across the industry on many levels, like how do you create that space in what role does like the vulnerability to be your true self bring into that people know that they're going to get the John today that they'll probably get tomorrow and they might get 2 months from now as well?
Yeah, I think part of that comes from time, right? Because again, you need to earn people's respect, and you try to do that as a leader in everything you do. You learn early on that there's different types of leaders, and Jill speaks to this often, and I've heard Jill speak so often on so many impactful leadership topics, but it reminds me of, kind of growing up in a steel mill industry where things were very autocratic, and you can come in and you can crack the whip and this domineering leadership style, and it works for a short period of time. And you see results for a short period of time. But then once you get to that maybe 24-month period, it usually starts to wean. The stress, the pressure, staff starts to leave. You start to get the pushback. The leader tries to do the same thing that they've always done, and it just doesn't work long term, as opposed to if you try to go through it and try to learn and understand what's going on and understand your team and what makes them click, you realize that the same approach isn't the same for everybody. And that's where I think a lot of that comes from when you're collaborating with people, is understanding, who's got what strengths. I mean, to Jill's point, no one would ever say that I'm patient. But I remember at that time, Jill, myself, there was another league president on the call. I think Renee was on that. We were talking about, here's an idea that I had about doing something for the industry around the topic of the day that was going on. And it seemed very simple to me. But then within 15 to 20 minutes of the conversation, I realized that this isn't ever going to happen. So, but all for good reasons, because my perspective was different. And then, gathering all of that was big. But I think that's how you do it, is gathering those perspectives, but somehow, and I don't know how else to say it other than always having your head on a swivel. That was always beaten into my head in sport, especially in football, where you're always looking 360 at everything around you. And that's more true in management today, I think, than ever. In leading, mm-hmm. you need to look at that. You can't always just look forward. You've got to be able to scan the field.
Something I was thinking about when we were talking about this, and I remember actually when Mike Valentine was on the show, who you know very well, a mentor of yours, it was kind of one of these questions that was in my head afterwards that I didn't bring up, that I was thinking about. But there's that sense of like balancing, and I think in a social media world, we've all seen it, people who share too much, that balancing authenticity with your own boundaries, personal privacy, things like that as well, right? Like everybody that is around us doesn't need to know everything about us, hopefully. So.
Well, I think that's very hard. And again, it's something that you struggle with. I mean, I do, right? Because I'm on social media too. But I think the hardest part is some people are very gifted at being able to be who they are in a workplace environment and divorcing themselves from, they're very talented and very successful and very good. And, keeping everything kind of separate. And they might be a different person when they're not leading a group of people. But most of the leaders that I've had and the mentors that I've had and the folks that I've looked up to have pretty much been who they are. And that's kind of who I am. I like to think I am. I don't know how to be somebody else, right? I know Jill's heard me say this before. Like you taught early, look, be yourself, especially when you're interviewing for your first job or second, whatever the role is. Because if you're not yourself in that interview, then eventually you're going to be you. And that's not who they hired. So guess what? And that to me is to lead, but it can be challenging, especially as you're kind of moving up that ladder, because it's hard, because people now that you manage that knew you before, there's a different role, and then you're not part of that group anymore. And sometimes that, especially as a young leader, that was hard. I think in the beginning for me, that was a challenge to just understand when somebody told me you need to create a network outside of your office and outside of your workplace. And fortunately, I was told that early, and I've been blessed with a wonderful network of people to draw on and to work with and to collaborate with. That's the hardest part, because there's a certain part of you is you, authentically you, mm-hmm. when you lead and when you collaborate and when you're in the room. Just to your point, Randy, about you got to remember it's not about you in that room, right? Because there's leaders that they're always right. and they're always the smartest person in the room. And that's hard to deal with sometimes.
That what you were just talking about, it makes me think about, we use various assessments in our work at Humanidei, and sometimes candidates will complete an assessment and they'll say something to me like, well, am I supposed to fill that out like as my work person or my personal person? And I'm like, well, ideally there's not a lot of a gap between the two. And like, there are certain things, like I interact with my son differently than I interact with somebody at the Marriott Marquis Bar at GAC, for example, but I'm not a different person. Like my son wouldn't see me in that situation and be like, who is that lady? And similarly, I think and I have had my son around experiences where I'm around coworkers and people aren't like, wow, you're not who I have seen in these other settings. Like there's some consistency there, which I think when we talk about this idea of authenticity and like how we show up, that like some sort of expectation of who you're going to be in different situations really matters. And John, when you're talking about building that network outside of the office, we all, you talk about sometimes those leaders have to have all the answers, have to be right. I think we've probably seen situations where we think the world of somebody and then find out they were asked to exit their organization because like internally they weren't so well loved, or vice versa, where we interact with somebody else and we're like, who even is that person? And so there can be some of that challenge between who we are inside the office and maybe who we are outside. When we check references at Humanidei, we always ask for one person you've reported to and one person who's reported to you, as well as one other person. And it's just because we don't want to hire somebody for one of our clients who kisses up or kicks down. We want them to be like, if you're coming in with this like authenticity and leadership charisma and all of that, we hope it goes all directions out of you with that authenticity too.
Yeah, which reminds me of the apple polisher that they talk about. Like, you got to be careful where this person who's the straight A student and really bright and everybody loves, and they're still the person that sits in the front of the class and they have the polished apple for the teacher every day. So you don't need to do that. You articulate all that very well.
So you think about that, like going back to that apple polisher idea. So that idea of like, ooh, I have to present us perfect here. I think many of us start our careers thinking that. And Randy, you as well on this one, but through your leadership journeys, when did you first realize that showing up with your humanity, like showing up as a human rather than a robot, was actually a strength? That first time when you really kind of maybe can think back to that point in your career where you realized that being fully human is a strength. And most of us didn't, start out with we talk a lot now about bring your full self to work. And that's really not kind of when we all started our careers, we were not encouraged to bring our full selves to work.
No.
So
not at all. Break it to you.
So yeah, at what moment in your careers did that start to shift? Did you start to realize that showing up really could be the best thing you could do as a leader?
So I would say two. One was early on in my career, an error that I had made, and it was very young, early on in my roles as leadership, and I was still in my 20s. So it was one of those things where it was a big project I was leading for the credit union, and it went south. And I remember getting called into the CEO's office and getting asked the question, what happened? And I just said, I thought I asked all the right questions, but I didn't ask the right question, because people were like, take him off the project. He's too young. Et cetera, et cetera. And it was like, the question was like, what happened? And instead of trying to be somebody else or blame somebody else, I just said that. And he just looked at me and said, go fix it. And as I was walking out, the assistant looked at me and said, good answer, Johnny. She had my personnel file there. So obviously if I would have answered something differently, but that was a lesson of just being honest and truthful and just being there and taking accountability for whatever happens. And it seems easy to say, take accountability, but when you're in that role and you're a junior leader or junior manager, you're not, your level's below the CEO, but you're in that CEO's office. And then the next one was a person that reported to me passed away unexpectedly. And I get a call from the credit union, and it was actually from Mike, and he's, hey, this is what's happened. And I remember I was in a league meeting, so I left the league meeting and went to the house, the gentleman's house, and his wife was there, and friends and family, and you realize that your work stuff is pretty meaningless at that point. But the relationships that you've built, whether it's with your team, and you realize what your team needs then is compassion and empathy and an understanding of what they're going through, that their boss is gone, their friend, their colleague, their coworker, and all of that. And that was such a impactful moment of just sitting there and everybody kind of hugging each other. We went through that. It just seems those are the times when it's sad that it's a tragedy or it's a horrible, things that occur, but it's those moments that help you realize what's important. Because when things are going great, it's easy, but it's when you get unexpected challenges like that, and you try to draw on that network and how you've seen other people react and work on things that are huge.
For me, it's kind of a tale of two careers, right? I feel like out of college and the first career trajectory I had, I was like trying to be what I thought you were supposed to be. I will tell you that it really was a pretty hard switch. There was a transition that was happening, like I would say in my life, where I was kind of trying to transition away from a career that I was successful, but not happy, just miserable, and had no idea how I'd do it for another 30 years, to then like coming over to credit unions and kind of that time around starting CUInsight. It was like, what I'm not going to be? Well, something I'm not. So, if you think back 15, 16 years, I wasn't wearing ties, showing up in jeans and a sports coat to GAC. I was like, I'm just going to be me. There's a more chillness to me than the first 10 years of my career, which was in a suit and tie every single day. And, I still wear them for Renee. But that idea of like really taking a look at like, okay, in this space where nobody knows me, I'm going to be the truest version of me that I can possibly be. And we'll see how that flies. So that was a big thing. But I think it did start even earlier, where it was just like knowing that I didn't have all the answers. And quite honestly, sometimes I didn't have all the answers in my own life. Who was I to think I was that smart? But that was, to me, I do look at that and I look back to, over the past now 15, 20 years, and it's just a different thing. I don't think I surprise people. Who I am is who I am, and that's kind of it. And there's something to that, right? And with that, I think it allows our teams to be honest as well. I do remember David and I started CUInsight together, and he is much more by the books and technical and got the finance, like the details matter to him. And I think it was Robbie on our team who was like, it's really good there's the two of you, because if it was just you, we'd probably have a good month and be working from a boat, but we might not get our paychecks. And I'm like, that's probably true. Yeah.
It's funny how the idea of early in our careers and what's modeled for us and the impact it makes. I always talk about, I started my career and Tracy was my first boss. She wasn't technically. I reported to somebody who reported to Tracy at the Montana League. And I remember what Tracy modeled in authenticity. Like I remember her talking about, and I bet she probably doesn't remember saying this, but she talked about like, I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to be the one who does a cartwheel on a golf course. I like, that was kind of the her like humanness coming out. Meanwhile, I had a direct supervisor, and I'll always remember this like clearly, because 25 years later, I remember we did marketing services for credit unions, and a client reached out and asked a question. And I responded to it emailed both of us. I responded to the email and said, my supervisor was on vacation. And so I was going to go ahead and follow up on this ask they had. And when my supervisor got back, she was so upset that I had shared with the client that she had taken a vacation, because she didn't want the client to know that she had taken a vacation. And so to me, that like sent a really strong message to me of like, never be out of the office, never be unavailable. And if you are, make sure nobody knows about it. And like sometimes still when I sat in out of office, I still like get like nervous about it, because I'm like, but then they'll know I took a day off. I'd like to think that we've evolved to a point in our like human journey that we understand that most people don't work every single day all the time. But it is kind of funny when you think about those those early examples, like in how they shape you for better or for worse, in this how authentically you may show up in a situation.
It's interesting about that when you said that, because there's times where you're going to be away and maybe just for a day or two, but I think sometimes, right, we're all wired differently. Some of us can shut off and just shut down. I've got a friend that goes away back to Greece for a month a year, turns off the phone, turns off the email, can do it. I just couldn't do it. That's just not me. So I can understand that, but I am jealous sometimes.
I get like defensive about it too. Like if I have an out of office, it's like, oh, I'm out of the office and I get back and somebody's like, oh, I hope you had a great vacation. I'll be like, I was on site with clients. I was like, and it's like,
exactly.
It was a polite greeting, Jill. You could just move beyond it. Like you don't have to justify it.
Right.
So I am like, typically I'm like, oh, I'm authentic. I'm vulnerable. I'm fully human. Unless it's about being out of the office. And then I'm super defensive. It turns out.
Get us back on track, Randy.
Right. Oh, no, I have to say this. We are on track. And I'd ask this question because it's one that I'll tell you for a few years, I've been asking a version of this on the podcast. So I was kind of excited to bring it up into this conversation as well. Is, you mentioned it earlier, John, like, coming from the steel mill town, like it's from Detroit. It was all the cars, right? So Barry Sanders, just got to throw that out there. Best running back ever. So the question that I would pose on this is like, we all grew up reading the same books, and like leadership has changed over time. And the examples that were set for us maybe have proved not to be fully the best way, like, to lead in the current environment. So for the leader that's out there and I guess maybe is still struggling, where they see like a little bit of vulnerability or letting yourself in or being a little more human as a liability still, is there advice you would give to somebody who's like, I know I need to make this shift, but that's just not how I've done it my entire career?
So I don't know if Jill would find, if you, Randy, have seen this, but in a lot of those instances, it's because of where they're at today or the environment they're in won't allow them to do that. And that's what makes them nervous about that. And what I would say is, so yeah, you definitely have to be cognizant or aware of the surroundings you're in, right? But what I have told people in that situation is learn as much as you can about how you don't want to be. I think you learn as much from managers or supervisors, managers, leaders as you do from great ones. And I've had great mentors and been exposed to incredible leaders. But the one thing that still sticks to me when I was working at the bank for someone that I had a lot of respect for before, and then I went to the bank and it was a whole different situation. And when I decided to leave and go back to the credit union I had left, the comment was, I was getting ready to go to get my MBA. And they said, well, it's like college, you're going to take classes that you don't necessarily like. And I said, that's true, but I can always change professors. And that was hard, but it was a lesson that just helped me understand better, to really understand who's leading you. And then that motivated me one way. And then working for others motivated you another way, right? Those positive influences. And as you go through managers, you're going to have cheerleaders that are managers, which are great, but that may not be your best environment for you. But you've got others that are going to be hard on you, but with compassion. And I think back to when you look at different coaches. So you brought up the line. So go back to, different coaches that you've had, people that the team loves their coach, right? You have player coaches, but they're usually the ones that will get in your face, but they'll put their arm around you the next minute and tell you, all right, that can't happen again. Or let's, what do we got to do to make it better? And they adjust as they need to. So my thing is adjust to who you report to and adjust to their personalities and learn what you can, because chances are you're not, either they're going to leave or you're going to leave, and you can still take something from that on how to improve.
Jill, thoughts?
Sometimes in job interviews, we ask for candidates to tell us the lessons they've learned, good and bad, from other leaders they've had. And that's where it is kind of that there is always something to learn from everyone. And some of it is exactly as John just said, like learning what not to do as you move forward on that. That does make me think, though, in a situation where you are the leader and maybe you are a newer leader, you came from perhaps a less vulnerable, more perfectionistic culture, and now you've got your team, you're the new leader there, you walked in, and John, I know has it been a decade now that you've been at Maryland, DC?
October will be 14 years.
14 years. So time flies.
I know, it really does.
So, it's been a while since you were the new kid, right? And Randy, you sort of like started and built your organization, so you never really got to walk into CUInsight as the new CEO. You just sort of
I was completely the new kid in the credit union family, though. I remember going to the first GAC and not knowing a soul. So
maybe you did have some of that too, Randy, where like John, thinking back to that first day you walked in, you're the CEO of the Maryland DC Association. You've got a team of people who are working there. You've got credit unions who have been affiliated, who have ideas, and they're looking to you for the answers. And Randy, in your case, maybe it was a little different. You walked into the credit union movement and you wanted people to think you knew your stuff so that they would, they would trust you to represent them, promote them on that. How long did it take to be able to say, all right, I'll make the first move in admitting what I don't know and build and like, when did you really start to feel like you were building genuine trust, engagement, and alignment with your, I'll say, key stakeholders? And, was it right away? Did you just walk in the first day and say, okay, I don't know all the answers. Let's have a bunch of one-on-ones. Teach me what I don't know. Or did it take a little more on that as you were moving forward with that? So I guess that's kind of like, what did it take to make you take that first step toward vulnerability?
Wow. So my first day, well, maybe it was my second day, I was brought to a chapter meeting because they want to know what I'm going to do at the association. And I was like, it's my second day or my second week. I don't really know. But I told them, like, here's what my vision is. I want to come out. I want to meet as many of you as I can. And to your point, Jill, I went to the staff and said, help me understand what you do about our credit unions. And then I intentionally tried to meet with, at least contact every single credit union in the association that year. Because it was a new area. Somebody called me a carpetbagger because I wasn't from around the area that I was, like, how long are you going to be here? You're like a carpetbagger coming from Chicago to the East Coast. What do you know? But again, it took time. That was the thing that coming in, always felt that it was going to take time because I was from the outside, and most leagues, at least in this environment, people either were from the area or had been involved in the local association or they had familiarity. And I was coming to, an area where no one had familiarity with me. And just understanding that the onus was on myself to prove myself to them and to earn their respect. And understanding that, I think that was, so it took, I would say, probably a few years before I felt I could say that I was from here.
Yeah. I like what you said there, that the onus is on you, right? You're the unknown in that they all know each other. Mm-hmm. They all know the region, even for that matter, right? That you're the new guy. So you're the one who has to build the trust over time.
One comment that stuck out to me during that time was in meeting with people is I remember some of you know Andre Lucas, who works for us as our director of compliance, beloved by everybody, an incredible personality and just engages with people, in an exceptional way. And I remember making the comment to our staff about the unsolicited feedback that I got about that was a one common theme in everyone that I had met with at that time. And somebody said, well, what about the rest of us? And because I had offended people, and it's not so much that you're asking, right? It's that feedback that you get. And to tie back to the greatest football player to ever live, Walter Payton from the Bears, he has a saying that I still use it when we talk to credit unions, where somebody asked him, you're not very boastful. You're not very, you're not one of these hot shots out there. And he said, look, I was taught at a young age that when you're good, you tell other people. When you're great, other people will tell you. And when I was doing those meetings, that was what a lot of that was. A lot of people were telling us what was great about the association. And that's what I wanted to hear, because they were also telling me what wasn't that great either and what we needed to improve in. So it was, how do you set the environment to do that? And also an environment where your team doesn't feel like it's personal when people are saying that they'd like to see something improve. And that was the hardest part, I think, early on.
Vulnerability and authenticity makes a big difference. And I actually just wrote an article on CUInsight about this, but that idea of like, do you want to be perfect or do you want to be better? Because if you want to be perfect, you won't accept feedback on like how to improve. You'll like that anything that is like a suggestion for improvement feels like an attack on your perfectionism. But if you want to be better, you can be a little bit vulnerable and you can ask for like, what's something I could do to improve? How could I deliver a better experience for you? And like that can be a tough thing to get around, like that initial being vulnerable enough to take the feedback that lets you get better. And sort of the oxymoron there, the paradox that exists within that is because if you don't believe that like that feedback actually matters and holds some legitimacy, you're not going to get better than you are right now. And so, and especially when you've got a brand new boss, like I can just imagine like brand new boss is going out, asking people for feedback and the team members are like, what the heck? We want him to think we're perfect. Like he's making judgments on us right now. Being able to create that space where it's like, it's okay that people are telling me how the association can improve, because that's going to be what gets you to where you are 15 years later, John, in that place, right?
I think that's another lesson, I think, for especially younger leaders is ask what you can do to be better. And I think it came up, Randy, in your first interview with Mike Valentine, like where he brought the review and I just kind of stopped him and I was like, okay, thanks, Mike. But like, what do I need to do to be better or to get better? I can't remember the exact how it went, but it's those things that I think as a leader, you owe your team as well to talk about. There's all these great things. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. But there's things that we can do to get better as a team. And then what can I do to become a better leader for you? I think that dialogue is important to have, but it's also get that feedback and incorporate it.
I was so fortunate. I mean, I feel still grateful to this day that when we were starting CUInsight, Tom Greaves, who was the publisher of Credit Union Times, but by all means would be our direct competitor, was so open with me to my questions as I was very ignorant in the field I was moving into and trying to create something. The other person was a former colleague of both of yours, Paul Gentile, because he had been previously the publisher of the Times and had moved on. And the amount of times I asked both of those guys, like, what would you do here? Because I'm not sure what I'm doing is working. They both were very honest with feedback. Tom was a little less direct than Paul, as that won't surprise you, but although I love him for it. This has been amazing. I know we could go on forever, so we do have to start wrapping this up. There's one question that we were going to have a little fun with some rapid fire questions, but now I'm thinking, Joe, we need to skip that so we can get to the end and sharing one. But there's one that I want to ask both of you too, because I thought it was so great. But I can't believe over 7 years I've never asked. But what's one thing people often get wrong about you?
Oh, geez.
I love this question.
I think Patty Corkery might have asked me this when I was a guest on her podcast, because I thought about it for a while.
Maybe I stole this from Patty's. Well, listening to her, I just thought it was a shout out to our friend Patty.
Because I was so stumped when she asked me, and I was like, I pretty much what you see is what you get, I don't think. And then I was like, no, I'm a lot funnier than people know I am. And that's my thing that I decided is like the one thing that people don't realize how funny I am, I think. So, according to me. And so
according to you.
Really?
Yeah, we know you're hilarious.
Right. Hilarious. So.
Jill had a great story on this one, but that I am an introvert that played an extrovert on TV and at conferences. After Jill and I first started dating, Felicity, a friend of all of ours, also came up to Jill at GAC and was like, how do you keep up with Randy? That's the opposite. Jill's the extrovert. I'm the introvert.
I think it's funny. I still don't know how to answer that after all the time you've given me. But I would say sometimes it's that people don't realize that I'm paying attention when people don't think I'm paying attention, or observing when people don't think I'm observing. So I think that's probably the one thing that people get wrong. Like well, he's, just out there talking, or he's just out there glad handing. And it's like, but there's an intention to all of that.
Okay. Now we are going to wrap it up. John, now on the podcast, we kind of try to give the listeners one takeaway. So if there's just one thing we wanted to leave everybody with, we will let you go last since you didn't know this was coming. But we're going to start with Jill. So from this conversation, what was your key takeaway?
I'm going to take us back to both the beginning and the end, I guess, and one of my favorite words. But we started this conversation just as John just ended it with, which is that emphasis on intentionality. And this idea of kind of what you just ended with, this idea of like people might see you out there and be like, oh, John's just out having a good time, making friends, and like not recognizing the intentionality that you're approaching that with. But we started the conversation too by starting talking about facing a time of uncertainty and ensuring that you react to those times of uncertainty with intentionality. And so what I think that kind of brings me to that key wrap up on it is being human means being intentional, and showing our humanity is not just accidentally, carelessly going through life all like whatever happens, happens, but it's being cognizant and being intentional. And intentionality does not contradict authenticity. We can be intentional and be human and still be authentic with that.
Mine was, and it was a great callback to a previous episode that, that time when Mike was on the podcast talking about you stopping him. But that idea that, and I think it was kind of brought up, that it really was weaved through the entire conversation, was this idea that like, if you're showing up as your truest self, you don't have all the answers, and it's okay not to have them, but it is building that network around you or the skill set to be able to go out and find them. But also, if that's how you are and you're trying to grow and learn and not have all the answers, but maybe find some more out, then it's also asking for that. Like if they see you as a leader asking for the feedback, like what John was talking about going around on his first couple of days in the gig, if they see you asking for the feedback, it sure makes the people that you're leading probably feel much better about asking for that feedback and asking for the advice as well. So that was something that was resonating with me.
Yeah, I think the takeaway when it all gets to what Jill said, what you said, Randy, but it also, to me, gets back to just being you, right? Like being who you are, because that's who you're going to be. And right, wrong, or indifferent, being intentional about what you're going to do, knowing that it's not about you, I think, as a leader. And I think that's hard sometimes because as a leader, often you're elevated and people will give you compliments, whether they're earned or not, right? You never know who's trying to gather favor or whatever it is. And while it is lonely at the top, but that's why, but that's what it is. And it's not about you. I think that's the hardest part sometimes, is to remember that. And if you remember that, you're making it about everybody else. You're making it about the people that you work with. You're making it about the people that you serve and who you're with.
That is the perfect way to wrap it up, John. Thank you for being here and your honesty and in the heart that you bring to it. We knew this would be a fun conversation. But before we sign off, just a quick few housekeeping notes. Everything we talked to today will be linked to in the show notes. Reach out to us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you, hear what's resonating, what your thoughts are on this, what you'd like to hear next, maybe a guest you'd like next for us to have a conversation with. A big thank you again to our sponsor, the Sheeter Group, the leading executive benefits firm and supporter of the podcast. We couldn't do this without them. And if you haven't yet subscribed, now's the time. We're on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. We can get it right on your Alexa. And of course, a huge thank you to John for being here today and all of you for listening. Y'all rock. We hope our paths cross soon. Be well, friends. Until next time.